My name is Juliana Carter, though everyone who knows me calls me Julie. I'm 30 years old, and until recently, I thought the worst thing my family could do was disappoint me. I was wrong. Sometimes the people closest to you can spend years teaching you exactly how little space you occupy in their hearts, and somehow, you still convince yourself that the next birthday, the next Christmas, the next achievement will finally make them see you. For me, that person I could never compete with was my younger sister, Emma. She was 2 years younger than me. But growing up, you would have thought she was the firstborn, the miracle child, and the future of the Carter family rolled into one perfectly polished package. Emma was everything my parents understood. Straight A's, captain of the debate team, homecoming queen, eventually, a full scholarship to Princeton. I was different. I liked pulling apart radios to understand why they worked. I collected discarded circuit boards from neighbors. When other girls my age were decorating notebooks, I was sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor with wires, soldering tools, and old electronics spread around me. My parents called it my weird computer phase. The phase lasted 20 years. I still remember our elementary school science fair. I was in 5th grade and Emma was in 3rd. For weeks, I built a small robot using sensors salvaged from discarded electronics. It could detect obstacles and change direction without anyone controlling it. Emma made a baking soda volcano. Guess which project ended up photographed for the local newspaper? Emma stood there smiling beside her papier-mâché volcano, while my parents hovered around her like she had just landed a spacecraft on Mars. My robot won 2nd place at a regional robotics competition a few years later. Dad spent most of the ceremony checking his phone. But when Emma won a local spelling bee, dinner, relative, balloons, that was how things worked in our house. Emma's achievements were events. Mine were hobbies. When Emma wanted piano lessons at 7, my parents bought her a baby grand piano. When I asked to take a programming course at 9, Dad frowned at the brochure. You already spend too much time staring at machines. It teaches coding. You should concentrate on real subjects. At 16, Emma received a BMW. At 16, I received advice. If you want transportation, Dad told me, earn it. So I did. I rode my bicycle to my part-time job at an electronics store. Sometimes in rain, sometimes in freezing weather, saving everything I could. Oddly enough, I'm grateful for that now. My parents accidentally taught me independence while trying to teach me that I wasn't worth investing in. High school only widened the divide. Emma became valedictorian and was accepted to Princeton. The night her letter arrived, Mom cried. Dad opened champagne. They called grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles, anyone who would answer. They booked one of the most expensive restaurants in town for her celebration. 2 weeks later, my acceptance letter arrived from State University. I had received a partial academic scholarship because of my grades and leadership on the robotics team. I ran into the kitchen holding the letter. Mom, look. She read it. That's nice. Sweetheart. Dad glanced over. Have you considered community college? You could save money. That was my celebration. We eventually ordered pizza. Halfway through dinner, Mom started discussing Emma's Princeton orientation. I remember staring at the untouched slice on my plate and realizing something I wouldn't fully understand until years later. I wasn't jealous of Emma. I was starving for my parents to look at me the way they looked at her. College changed me. Emma went to Princeton and began collecting prestigious internships and corporate connections. I attended State University, studied electrical engineering with a focus on computer systems, and continued working Whenever I called home, I got interrogated. How are your grades? Still working at that electronics store? Have you considered transferring somewhere better? Emma's calls were celebrations. Goldman Sachs internship, business club president, connections with executives. At Thanksgiving during my junior year, my parents spent nearly an hour telling our relatives about Emma. Finally, an uncle asked about me. Dad waved his fork dismissively. Julie's doing her computer thing at State. She seems happy enough. My computer thing? I smiled because everyone was watching. Inside, something folded in on itself. What none of them understood was that I had ambitions every bit as large as Emma's. Mine simply didn't come with a recognizable corporate logo. During my senior year, I developed a data encryption system for my capstone project that attracted interest from several major technology companies. I graduated with job offers already waiting. When I told my parents, Mom smiled. That's wonderful, Julie. Then she added, almost immediately, did you hear Emma's starting salary is going to be 6 figures? So I made a decision they considered ridiculous. I turned down the safest offers. I started my own technology consulting company. The first office was barely large enough for a desk, 2 chairs, and the secondhand server equipment stacked against the wall. For 2 years, I fought for every client. Then a mid-sized manufacturing company suffered a devastating cyber attack. Their entire network had been encrypted. Hackers demanded $200. Ling ling ling. Their existing IT company said recovery was impossible. The CEO gave me one chance. I spent 72 hours inside that building. I slept maybe 4 hours total. I reverse-engineered the attack, recovered their data, repaired their systems, and redesigned their security infrastructure so the same vulnerability couldn't be exploited again. They paid me $50. Ling ling ling. More importantly, they told everyone what I had done. Within a year, I had more work than I could handle. I hired one specialist, then another. Eventually, I moved into a larger office. By my 5th year, 8 people worked for me, and the company was grossing more than $500,000 annually. My parents' description of my career: Julie does computer work. At family dinners, Mom would proudly announce Emma's newest promotion before turning toward me. And how's your little hobby business going? Hobby. She would laugh awkwardly. You know what I mean? I did. Then I met Daniel Reeves. Daniel was an elementary school teacher. Varm. Intelligent. Quietly confident. And completely uninterested in corporate status. He actually listened when I talked about my work. The first time I explained a cybersecurity project to him, I stopped halfway through. Sorry, I'm boring you. He looked genuinely confused. Why would you think that? Nobody had ever asked me that before. Daniel and I fell in love slowly when I introduced him to my family. However, the old pattern returned. Emma arrived with Brad, her successful lawyer boyfriend, and they dominated dinner with stories from a glamorous New York business trip. Eventually, Mom asked Daniel what he did. I teach elementary school. Her expression shifted into that painfully polite smile. How noble. Then she turned back toward Brad. Daniel noticed. Of course he noticed. Later that night, sitting in my car, he squeezed my hand. You know they're wrong about you. Right. I looked toward my parents' brightly lit house. I know, but the truth was more complicated. Some part of me still wanted them to prove him wrong. Some part of me still believed there would eventually be a moment when my family finally looked at me and understood what I had become. I had no idea that moment was coming, and it would begin on my 30th birthday. With a photograph from Tahiti and 6 words from my father that I would never forget. Wrong. What? He glanced toward the front of the house. You have visitors. Who? Your entire family. I stood. Daniel lowered his voice. Emma looks like she's been crying. I walked toward the front door. Through the glass, I could see them. Mom looked terrified. Emma's eyes were swollen. Brad stood awkwardly behind her, and Dad looked furious. I opened the door. Dad stepped forward immediately. Julie, we need to talk. I looked directly at him. Do we? His jaw tightened. I folded my arms. Because I seem to remember you saying you didn't want to waste your time on a clown. For the first time in my life, my father had nothing to say, and for the first time in hers, Emma looked at me, not like the disappointing older sister, but like the one person who could decide what happened next. For several seconds, nobody moved. My parents, Emma, and Brad stood on my porch like they'd rehearsed what they wanted to say during the drive over. Only to forget every word the moment I opened the door. Emma finally stepped forward. Julie, I know you're angry about Tahiti. Angry? You have every right to be. Dad shifted impatiently behind her. Emma glanced at him before continuing. We handled it badly. I almost laughed. You handled it badly. I know how that sounds. Do you? Daniel appeared quietly behind me, but didn't interfere. Emma swallowed. What happened was wrong. But you can't let a family problem affect innocent people at Henderson. There it was. Not I'm sorry. Not yet. Henderson. My employees. Emma continued. My team. Our clients. They had nothing to do with Tahiti. If Henderson loses your company, a lot of people are going to be affected. I studied my sister. For once, she wasn't dressed like the untouchable corporate executive who showed up at family dinners dispensing career advice. She looked exhausted. You actually make a valid point. I said. Hope flashed across her face. There are innocent people who could be affected by my decision. Yes. Just like there was an innocent person affected when the 4 of you secretly flew to Tahiti on her 30th birthday. Mom stepped forward. Julie, that's different. I looked at her. How? That was a family matter. This is about people's livelihoods. For a moment, I couldn't believe she'd actually said it. Then, 30 years of swallowed responses came rushing back. My livelihood has been affected by family matters for years. Mom blinked. What does that mean? It means every time you called my company a hobby, you were dismissing my livelihood. Every time Dad told me I should get a real job, he was dismissing my livelihood. Every time Emma offered to get me an entry-level IT position because apparently owning a successful company wasn't respectable enough, you were dismissing my livelihood. Emma looked down. I continued, you only care about what I do now because suddenly Emma needs it. Dad's face hardened. Julie, stop being dramatic. Daniel moved slightly beside me. I touched his arm, silently telling him I could handle this. Dad continued, this isn't about everything that's happened since you were a child. This is about Emma's career. I smiled. Exactly. What? This is about Emma's career. The career this family has worshipped for years. That's ridiculous. Is it? I looked at Mom. How much did you spend on Emma's Princeton celebration? She didn't answer. I turned toward Dad. What did you say when I got my engineering scholarship? Nothing. What car did Emma get at 16? Julie, what did I get? His jaw tightened. A lecture about earning my own transportation? I looked at Emma. When you got promoted, Mom called every relative we have. Emma's eyes filled with tears. When my company passed $500,000 in annual revenue. Did either of you even know? Silence. That silence answered everything. Brad finally spoke. Look, Julie, I understand you're hurt. I turned toward him. But don't you think this is an overreaction? It was just a vacation. Something inside me went completely still. Just a vacation. Brad immediately realized he'd chosen the wrong words. I didn't mean on my 30th birthday. I know. A family vacation where the family deliberately excluded me. He opened his mouth, and then my father publicly called me a clown. Brad looked away. Emma began crying. Julie, please. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry. I looked at her. She wiped her cheeks. I'm sorry about Tahiti. Why wasn't I invited? She hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Emma. She looked toward our parents. Mom's face changed. Don't. She whispered. I stared at her. Don't. What? Emma exhaled. Dad thought you'd bring Daniel. Daniel stiffened beside me. I felt my stomach drop, and Brad had gotten this discounted package through one of his firm's clients. Dad said the trip was supposed to be. She stopped. Supposed to be what? Relaxing. I almost smiled. And Daniel and I prevent relaxation. No. Then say it. Emma finally looked at me. Dad said you always made family trips uncomfortable because you were defensive about your career. And he didn't want another vacation where everything turned into an argument. Dad interrupted. That's not exactly what I said. It doesn't matter. I said, yes. It does. He stepped forward. I was angry when I wrote that Facebook comment. You called your daughter a clown on her birthday. I shouldn't have. No. You shouldn't have. Mom's eyes were filling with tears now. Julie. We love you. Those words hurt more than I expected. Do you? Of course we do. Then why does your version of love always look like Emma getting everything and me being expected to understand? Mom started crying. That's not fair. Neither was my childhood. Emma covered her mouth. Dad looked suddenly older. I continued. Quieter now. Love doesn't exclude someone from family vacations. Love doesn't mock someone's career for years. Love doesn't make someone spend 30 years wondering what they need to accomplish before their own parents become proud of them. We made mistakes. Dad said. His voice had softened. We know that. Do you? I pulled my phone from my pocket. Because yesterday, you left me a voicemail calling me selfish and vindictive. His face flushed. I was angry. You were angry in Tahiti too. Apparently. He looked away. You keep saying cruel things when you're angry, and expecting the rest of us to pretend they don't count afterward. Nobody answered. Emma finally whispered, What do you want? I looked at her. Tell me what you want. Julie, please. If there's something we can do to fix this, tell us. There was desperation in her voice. For years, I'd imagined moments like this. Emma finally needing something from me. My parents finally realizing they'd underestimated me. I thought it would feel satisfying. It didn't. It felt sad. I want respect. Emma nodded quickly. Okay. No. Listen. She went silent. I want Dad to post a public apology on Facebook. Dad's eyebrows rose. You publicly humiliated me. The apology should be public, too. He said nothing. I want all of you to acknowledge that my company is real. Successful. And something I built myself. Mom nodded through her tears. Of course. And I want each of you to apologize because you understand what you did, not because you're trying to save Emma's job. Emma wiped her face. We can do that. Good. Relief appeared on her face. Then I continued. But none of that guarantees I'm renewing Henderson's contract. Her relief disappeared instantly. Julie, this is important. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, so we were all standing together on the porch. The contract decision isn't only about Tahiti. Dad frowned. Then, what is it about? My company. I looked at Emma. Henderson represents around 60% of my revenue. Brad's expression changed immediately. He understood business well enough to know what that meant. That's dangerous concentration. He said, Exactly. Emma stared at him. I nodded. For years. Henderson has been comfortable. They're a great client. Rick has always treated me well. But I've turned down smaller projects because your company consumes too much of my team's capacity. So, this was already something you were considering? Mom asked. Yes. Before Tahiti. Not seriously enough. Emma looked confused. Then why now? Because Tahiti made me realize how much of my life I've built around proving myself to other people. I looked directly at my parents. I've spent 30 years trying to earn your approval. Mom lowered her head. I don't want to do that anymore. Dad leaned against the porch railing. So you're definitely leaving Henderson. My current contract ends this month. That hasn't changed. Emma began crying again. I'm going to lose my job. No. You're not. You don't know that. No. But if you're as good at your job as everyone has spent years telling me you are, Henderson, losing one technology contractor shouldn't destroy your career. That stopped her. It was harsh, but it was true. Brad put his hand on Emma's shoulder. Then he looked at me. Would you consider staying temporarily? I raised an eyebrow. As a consultant, train whoever replaces you. Help them understand the systems. I considered it. That might be reasonable. Emma looked up immediately. Really? I said I would consider it. She nodded. Okay. The next hour became the strangest family conversation we'd ever had. We moved inside. Daniel made coffee, then gave us privacy. Mom admitted first. We favored Emma. Dad stared at the floor. Mom continued. I don't think I ever said it to myself that way. But we did. Emma started crying again. I knew. Everyone looked at her. She twisted her hands together. I knew you treated me differently. Then, why didn't you ever say anything? I asked. She looked ashamed. Because I liked it. The honesty stunned me. I liked being the successful one. I liked being the daughter everyone bragged about. And sometimes... She hesitated. Sometimes I put you down because it made me feel even more successful. For once. There was no excuse attached. No justification. Just the truth. Dad finally spoke. I thought I was motivating you. I almost laughed. By calling my career a hobby? By pushing you? You weren't pushing me toward success. You were pushing me toward becoming Emma. He absorbed that quietly. That evening, Dad kept his word. He posted publicly. He acknowledged that his comment about me had been cruel, and that excluding me from the Tahiti trip had been wrong. More surprisingly, he wrote about my company. He admitted that he'd spent years failing to appreciate what I'd built. The comments came quickly. One uncle wrote that he'd always been impressed by my business. A family friend mentioned that her company had actually recommended my cybersecurity services. Someone else wrote, Julie built something from nothing. You should be proud of her. I stared at that comment longer than I should have. Monday morning. I walked back into Rick Henderson's office. I've thought about the transition. Rick leaned forward, and I'll give you 6 months. His eyebrows rose. 6 months. Consulting only. Reduced hours. My team transitions out of daily operations. And I'll personally help train whoever replaces us. Rick smiled for the first time since I'd told him I was leaving. I'll take it. There is one condition. Namit. My consulting rate is higher. He laughed. Of course it is. They shook hands. Over the next month, Henderson hired 3 different IT firms. All 3 struggled. The systems I'd built weren't intentionally complicated. They were simply customized around Henderson's exact operations. Emma's department felt the impact immediately. Reports that once appeared automatically suddenly required hours of manual work. 2 major campaigns were postponed. Emma started working 60-hour weeks. Then Rick called me. "Julie, come back full-time." "No. I'll nearly double the old contract." I paused. A year earlier, that number would have controlled my entire decision. Now, no. Think about it. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair. Through the glass wall of my office, I could see my employees working on 3 new projects we'd accepted since reducing our Henderson workload. Projects I'd wanted for years. For the first time, my company wasn't orbiting someone else's needs. Neither was I. Then, my phone buzzed. A message from Emma. "Can I ask you something about the client management architecture you built? I actually want to understand how it works." I read it twice. Not because the question was complicated, because for the first time in our adult lives, my sister wasn't offering me career advice. She was asking for mine. And somehow, that tiny change felt bigger than any apology. The 6-month transition period changed more than I expected. It changed Henderson and Associates. It changed Emma. And, slowly, it changed my family. But the biggest change was happening inside me. For years, I'd assumed that if my parents ever admitted they were wrong, everything would suddenly feel repaired. I imagined some dramatic apology, where 30 years of resentment disappeared in a single conversation. Real life wasn't that clean. The first family dinner after the confrontation was painfully awkward. Mom invited Daniel and me over on Sunday. When we arrived, she hugged me for slightly too long. Dad shook Daniel's hand like they were meeting for the first time. Emma and Brad were already sitting at the table. For several minutes, everyone seemed terrified of saying the wrong thing. Then Dad cleared his throat. "So, Julie." I looked up. "How's cybersecurity?" Daniel nearly choked on his water. I bit the inside of my cheek. "What specifically about cybersecurity?" Dad looked completely lost. "I don't know. Hackers." For the first time in weeks, I laughed. A real laugh. Dad laughed too. It wasn't profound, but it was a beginning. Over the following months, those conversations became less forced. Dad started asking real questions. He wanted to know how companies protected customer information, why ransomware attacks were increasing, and whether artificial intelligence would make cybersecurity more difficult. Mom began asking about my employees. She remembered their names. That alone surprised me. The biggest adjustment, however, was Emma. The first few weeks after I reduced my role at Henderson were brutal for her department. The automated reporting systems I'd built had become so integrated into their daily operations that nobody realized how much work they were eliminating. Without my team constantly maintaining and modifying those systems, problems accumulated. Emma called me one evening around 9. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. "Hey, Julie, can I ask you something?" Her voice sounded exhausted. "Sure. How did you build the campaign attribution system?" I paused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, how does it actually work?" That question would have been unremarkable from anyone else. Coming from Emma, it meant something. For years, she'd referred to everything I did as it stuff. Now she wanted to understand it. So I explained. We talked for almost 40 minutes. At one point, she went silent. "Wait," she said. "You built all of this yourself." "My team helped, but you designed the architecture." "Yes." Another pause. "That's incredibly complicated." I smiled. "Careful. You almost sound impressed." She laughed awkwardly. "I think I am." It wasn't an apology. Somehow, It mattered more. Henderson eventually hired a senior systems administrator named Marcus, and I spent several months training him. He was talented, but even he admitted the transition was difficult. You built this entire environment around the way Henderson actually works, he told me one afternoon. Most consultants force clients into whatever system they're selling. That always bothered me. It probably explains why they don't want to lose you. He was right. Rick called me twice during the first month. The second call was almost funny. "I've got a number for you." "Rick, just listen." He named a figure nearly double my previous contract. A year earlier, I would have accepted before he finished speaking. Instead, I looked through my office window. My team was working on projects for 4 new clients. One was a medical technology startup. Another was a regional logistics company that needed an entirely new cybersecurity platform. They were difficult projects. Interesting projects. Exactly the work I'd wanted. "I appreciate it," I said. But no. Like Sahil, I knew you were going to say that. "I'll honor the consulting agreement." "I know. And Marcus is getting good. He's not you. He doesn't need to be." That sentence stayed with me after we hung up. Neither did I. I didn't need to be Emma. I never had. By the end of the 6 months, Henderson represented less than 20% of my revenue. Overall revenue had actually increased. We hired 3 additional specialists. For the first time, I understood that leaving Henderson hadn't damaged my business. It had freed it. Emma's career survived too. She had to postpone 2 major campaigns and rebuild several workflows. But she adapted. More importantly, she stopped treating my career like something beneath hers. One evening at dinner, Dad mentioned that one of his friends needed help securing his company's network. Before I could respond, Emma said, "You should talk to Julie." Seriously. Her company is probably better than whoever you're using. I stared at her. "What?" She shrugged. "It's true." That tiny sentence would have meant nothing to anyone else. To me, it represented 30 years, turning in a different direction. Mom changed too, for most of my adult life. When she introduced Emma, she'd say, "This is my daughter Emma. She's a marketing executive." When she introduced me, she'd say, "This is Julie. She does computer work." One afternoon, I attended a charity event with my parents. Mom spotted several friends. She immediately pulled me toward them. "This is my daughter Julie," she said proudly. "She owns a very successful technology company. She specializes in cybersecurity." I almost looked behind me to make sure she wasn't describing somebody else. On the drive home, Dad glanced toward me. "Your mother has been practicing that introduction." Mom slapped his arm. "I have not." "You absolutely have." I laughed. 6 months after Tahiti, I finally made another decision I'd postponed on my birthday. Daniel and I returned to the restaurant where we'd had our first date. He thought we were simply celebrating the end of my Henderson transition. After dinner, we walked through the small park nearby. The ring had been sitting in my pocket all evening. My hands were shaking. Daniel noticed. "Are you cold?" "No." "You look nervous." "I am." He stopped walking. "Why?" I looked at the man who had sat beside me while my family publicly humiliated me. The man who had never once asked me to become smaller so he could feel larger. Then I reached into my pocket. His eyes widened. "Julie." I lowered myself onto one knee. "Yes." He blurted. I laughed. "I haven't asked yet." "I know what you're going to ask." "Could you let me finish?" He covered his mouth, laughing and crying at the same time. "Fine." "Daniel Reeves, will you marry me?" "Yes." He pulled me up before I could say anything else. For several minutes, the world consisted only of us. Later that evening, we told my family. I braced myself automatically. Old habits. Mom screamed. Dad hugged Daniel. Emma grabbed my hand to see the ring. Oh my God. Then Mom said something I wasn't prepared for. We're throwing you an engagement party. You don't have to. Yes. We do? Mom? No. She looked at me. We want to. Several weeks later, I walked into the same country club ballroom where my family had once celebrated Emma and Brad. Same room, same photographer, nearly the same number of guests, but this time, Daniel was beside me. For once, nobody treated our relationship like the less impressive version of Emma's. Mom gave a speech. Dad toasted my company. Even Emma spoke. My sister spent most of our lives being underestimated, she said. She glanced at me. Sometimes by people who should have known better. Her voice trembled slightly, including me. The room became quiet. I spent years thinking success was something you could recognize by a job title, a university name, or the clothes someone wore. She smiled sadly. Julie taught me that sometimes the most successful person in the room is the one nobody bothered to understand. I wasn't prepared for that. Daniel squeezed my hand. Later, Mom pulled me aside. I owe Daniel an apology too. For what? For the way I treated him when you first brought him home. She looked across the ballroom toward him. I was so obsessed with what I thought success should look like, that I couldn't see what mattered. And what's that? How happy he makes you. My throat tightened. Thanks. Mom? She hugged me. Things weren't perfect after that. They still aren't. 30 years of dysfunction doesn't disappear because someone posts an apology on Facebook. Sometimes Dad still compares us without realizing it. Sometimes Mom overcompensates. Sometimes Emma and I fall into our old roles before catching ourselves. But now, we talk about it. And more importantly, I stopped measuring whether my life was valuable by how enthusiastically my parents applauded it. That was the real thing Tahiti gave me. Not revenge, clarity. For years, every dismissal had chipped away at how I saw myself. When they called my company a hobby, some part of me wondered whether they were right. When they celebrated Emma and barely acknowledged me, some part of me wondered whether her life genuinely mattered more. When they excluded me, I wondered what was wrong with me. There was never anything wrong with my ambition. It simply didn't look like theirs. That Saturday morning, when I saw 4 people smiling beneath the words, "A wonderful day for a wonderful family," I thought they had finally proven I wasn't part of their family, but that wasn't what changed everything. It was Dad's comment. We didn't want to waste our time on a clown. 6 words, cruel enough to finally make me stop begging for approval. I once thought my surprise for them was ending that $300 zero contract. It wasn't. The real surprise was that the daughter they'd spent 30 years underestimating finally understood her own value. Emma kept her career. My parents got another chance to know me. Danielle became my fiancé. My company became stronger than it had ever been. And me, I stopped trying to prove I wasn't the family disappointment. Because once I stopped seeing myself through their eyes, I finally understood something that should have been obvious all along. I had never been one